Welcome to the Culture of Writing podcast, where writers, editors, and content strategists from Salesforce talk about how we work together to improve our craft and make content better.
So who wants to start? Lyman, Stephanie, Joe? Who wants to start?
I'll let Stephanie. She's the one that corralled Joe and I. So,
she's our glorious leader in this.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Stephanie show or Shaw. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so my name is Stephanie Shaw, and I've been at Salesforce for 8 years, but it feels like 10 because I started as a contractor. I started out in services in CSG, where I was implementing with customers. And then I did something crazy, and I started selling to customers as a solution architect. As a solution engineer. I was a solution architect in CSG, and then became a solution engineer in pre-sales. And I spent 3 years as a solution engineer, and that means I was the person that account executives called in before the sale. And my job as an SE was to demonstrate the product to make people want to buy it. So I got to know the customer's business, identify their pain points, and then present a solution on what's possible using Salesforce. So I showed prospects what it does, how to do it, and why it was worth their time and money, pre-sales. And then I became a technical writer, where I started writing for analytics, and now I write for Einstein Discovery, which is our machine learning models.
Lyman Ing. I'm also a technical writer. I cover Data Cloud, which everybody should know about. But prior to joining the CX team, so I've only been on board for about 9 months. Been with Salesforce for a total of about 4.5 years. And the first 3.5 years, I was also a solution engineer, just like Stephanie, with our analytics solutions. And but prior to that, I spent almost 20 years actually in industry, in consulting roles, so helping implement software solutions, not necessarily Salesforce, but different software solutions. And then also I was in the customer side, meaning I was part of an IT team, internal team that helped manage our at that point it was a Siebel CRM, different CRM solution, which we transitioned over, but always in the data space. So more in the buyer's position, which is interesting. And that's kind of how led to my career as a solution engineer. And I think having the background of implementing solutions and also being on the customer side as well gives you kind of instant credibility, so you understand what it is to be in the customer's seat, right? So we can always, as a solution engineer, I think the best thing that we can provide is just that being that trusted advisor, that we always have the customer's best interest in mind. We're not there just to make a sale, but to be able to create trust and be able to create relationships that, you know, you're not only buying a software, but you're buying relationships, right? And think that's kind of why, what gravitated towards solution engineering for me. And then just like Stephanie followed suit with her joining the CX team back in June, July of last year, and writing. And so yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
Yes. So hi, I'm Joe. I use they, them pronouns, and I've been officially a technical writer at Salesforce for almost a year now. But prior to that, I was in the trenches of support for 8 years at Salesforce and 12 years for like Yahoo and Microsoft and Hewlett Packard and all sorts of other major corporations. And so whereas these two got to build solutions for customers, I had to fix what the customers built. And so I come at writing from a like, how do we make it so that a customer can look at something and be like, oh, that's what's going on. That's what I did wrong, or not necessarily that's what I did wrong, but that's how I can improve what I've built. And so joining the CX team has kind of been a dream job for me, because I've always been writing, but it's always been very reactive. Like, okay, something has gone horribly wrong, and now I get to be in the position of, okay, how do we prevent stuff from going horribly wrong? But it's also given me a lot of insight into like why having use case driven documentation with clear technical limitations, because those are the kind of questions people have when they get into the weeds. They're like, well, can we do this? I don't know. So anyway, that's me.
And I think that's what binds us together, Stan, is our experience with how valuable content can be from the outside, whether it was in building, in sales, or with support, like we saw the value in the content that people use. And so when we got here as actual writers, thrilled to be writers, we looked around and we're like, wait, you guys don't realize how important you are? Do you realize the impact that you have? And the resounding answer we often got was no, they didn't realize. So a lot of it at first was just us like telling people in our teams, like, no, you don't understand. I would visit clients and they literally print out your docs and put it up on the wall, or they have things bookmarked, or like all these stories, and people don't realize the impact that they're making. We did, and that's why we came to this role. So a part of this presentation and talking about it is for writers to understand the impact that they make. And we were even more flabbergasted when the leadership up said it was news to them, and we were like, excuse me, like, I think it's important to remind ourselves and to everyone around us, product and sales included, that the content isn't just for adoption. It's not just for existing customers. We wouldn't be able to sell anything if it wasn't well documented.
That's incredible. So you're coming at it from the outside. You come in, you understand as users. So explain that. Explain the research that you did and what you came up with.
Before we go there with the
Sure.
research, let me kind of give you a little bit more background, right?
Oh,
Being on
thank
the
you.
customer end, right? So usually decisions are made at C-level, right? Decisions. However, there's people on the ground, people in IT, people in the business, and nobody wants to make a career-limiting decision, right? Because they put their name on the right. When I purchase Salesforce, this is my career potential, because it gets political a lot of times, right? Between if they have relationships with another vendor and so forth. So as people that help support, maintain this internally, we need to do the research to make sure that when the solution engineers and sales teams come and present to us, that they say one thing, but we want to make sure that it actually does it, right? And so that's why customers always want to look at documentation to see, okay, or they were not able to answer questions on the spot. And then the sales team says, well, we'll follow up with you. We'll send you some documentation that shows you how to do X, Y, and Z. So again, we're not even talking about, we always say customer documentation, but our lens on this is actually prospects, because we would love it if customers always bought Salesforce, but that's not the case. It's a very competitive market. And a lot of times this is where documentation, that's where we can have a competitive edge in the sales cycle, because that shows customers that Salesforce knows what they're talking about. They also have it in the documentation. It's already fully documented. And then that makes a buyer a little bit less worried about that. Okay, what they say can do it, it can actually do it. And then that's where when people like Joe, when they were in customer support, that we can always reference the documentation, right? Once you're a customer. So it's very integral to the actual whole selling process, because that's what customers look at to make sure that, again, we are checking the boxes to make sure that the documentation does exactly, or the team that's trying to sell it, and the documentation is transparent and also connect the dots, right? So I just kind of want to lay that land before we kind of talk about the metrics about that. And that's where, as Stephanie mentioned, especially in the kind of the landscape of where Salesforce is and where CX is we are very integral to the whole selling process of this. And not just when a customer actually buys it and they start adopting it. That's a little bit later in the game. We would love to get there, but more often than not, being in the pre-sales motions, I send a ton of different help documentations to prospects to make sure that, here, you have a question about this, here's how you do it. Or you have a question about that, send this to your admin, right? So we do that a lot as sales teams and account teams in general. Okay.
That's amazing. So simplifying it, and then Stephanie, you take it over, but simplifying it, it's like we sometimes like to think there's sort of a bright line that, the prospects are reading the marketing materials and they're reading the sales materials. And you're saying, no, it's not a bright line. It's just a continuum. And there's use for all of it in the process.
Like, let me just ask you, when you bought an appliance, did you just go and say, give me your best washing machine?
Mm-mm.
You didn't just rely on the sticker or the salesperson's opinion. You undoubtedly probably looked it up and looked at specs. It's the same thing when people are putting millions of dollars and their faith into a tool. There's a long process. But just to piggyback off of what Lyman was saying, I have this in CX. We don't just help people use it; we help people buy it. We help people see and understand what's possible. And we keep saying customer because at Salesforce we're so focused on the customer, but our prospect is our potential customer. So they're just as important. Yeah, so this is the procurement process. So anytime a prospective customer goes to purchase, they have to go through this procurement process within their organization.
And if anybody, let me just say, if anybody's listening to this, there's an incredibly complex flowchart diagram and spreadsheets that are all going into this massively complicated process.
Yeah, and that's an example of how it works. But along this process, and you can see you start with planning and development, proposal evaluation, and then there's the decision. Along each of these work streams, it requires an in-depth documentation review. Wow. At so many of these points. So first they have to identify the need or the gap, and then they have to gather evidence of that need or measure the impact of that gap. Then they have to gain approval of the need, research the solutions, evaluate the solutions, and then they get to decide and buy. But along each of those steps with each of those groups, there's a heavy reliance on public information and documentation. And Lyman and I can testify, like I've seen spreadsheets of requirements in the thousands.
Wow.
Yeah, they usually break it up. You get a boilerplate template that a customer sends out to X, Y, and Z vendor. And then that's part of the exercises we have to go through, making sure that, yes, we do this, copy, paste the link in there just to testify that we've done it. And that's the buying criteria. It's kind of archaic in some terms, but you need some way to be able to have commonality within the process, so there's no bias in it, right? And that's, again, very integral to the whole selling process.
Yeah, and if when they have a requirement, if they can't link to a doc that explicitly says, yes, it can, or no, it can't, they will contact their account team, the salespeople, pull them on a meeting, record the meeting, ask them to follow up an email, and ask them to send a copy of the slides. Because if it's not documented, it creates a lot of not just confusion, but I would even go so far to say like mistrust, right. Which is why it's like, no, you're telling me it can do this, but I don't see it. So I want you to send it to me an email. I want you to present to it, and I want it recorded, and I want a transcript, and I want all of these things, because they have to put that in their process, in their spreadsheet, like these.
It's part of the process of gaining the trust in the company and its ability to carry through. That's a really interesting point.
Right. As far as, the research that I did, so Phil Choi, so cool. My SIP level, actually, when I was talking to him about the idea that prospects use and rely on content very heavily, he basically said, prove it. He wasn't going to take my word for it.
That sounds like Phil.
Yes. And so I did what a good data analyst would do. I went in, I did a survey. So among salespeople, the strong majority say they always or often send or refer prospects to Salesforce Help. And 3 out of 4 say documentation is extremely or very helpful for prospects. And I also asked these salespeople and sales leaders to identify at which point of the sales cycle documentation is used. And we found that it's used throughout all stages, but increasingly so during the demo, trial, and especially during the requirements planning stage, which is right before they buy.
I'd like to call out the demo and trial points, because those are, having been adjacent to a lot of these conversations, especially when demos go awry in the support world. If folks understand what they're doing and how they did it, if an AE or an SE comes in and says, this is how we built this, customers are going to be like, cool, where's that written down? Where's the instructions that I can do that? How can I replicate what you just did here? And having that is super important, because there are playbooks, they're internal, but that again requires like, oh, take my word for it, I wrote the steps down, I'm going to email you this kind of sideline thing, rather than being like, here's our primary documentation, go check it out, we detail it for you.
Tag on from the trial. Trial can be a proof of concept, proof of value, where the customer has their hands on the software and they're trying to do some use case to prove out the value of what the sales team said it can do. And that's where, again, I'll kind of lean in on the whole limited resources. We can't be at a customer for 2 days straight, hand-holding them through the process. So a lot of times, again, we have confidence in our software and what it can do, is that we have a kickoff to say, here's the success criteria that we're trying to attain to. Here's what we're trying to do. And then if it works, then you would buy, right? Kind of that, kind of an agreement to do that. But the sales team, because we're limited in resources as well, a lot of times we can't be there throughout the week or 2 weeks or however long that trial is that there's a lot of communication through Slack or through emails, and they get stuck on something. Then I would have to go and find the help for it, send it over, right? It's a back and forth iterative process. Again, that's where I've so many times where I had to research it, find out what the issue is, and then provide the proper documentation if the customer can't find it themselves, to make sure to move the process along. Because a day or two lost in a 2-week trial or even 3 weeks is a lot, right? And that's why, again, I'll lean in on the whole documentation piece of it, how integral it is for that particular section.
Yeah, so then during the trial period, it's not just a trial of the product, of the software, of the features. It's also a trial run of our documentation. No one wants to buy something where they have to be handheld. So in sales, we know even if we could do it for you, like that's not a good look, because no one wants to be able to have to buy something and then they need someone to do it for them. They want to be able to do them themselves. So when in a part of that survey, at the end, I asked for any general comments about the role that Salesforce Help docs play in the sales process. And Jose Cifuentes, a lead solution engineer, said help docs are an essential piece of our sales enablement, discovery, and problem-solving process. We in sales all have pre-created templates of help articles that we send all clients for help with anything from connectors all the way to design, configuration, and limitations of the platform. They are the most important resource we have on hand to answer and reference client questions and help for scenarios we face on a day-to-day. And the VP of Solution Engineering, Steve Brown, said, our Salesforce Help is awesome and critical to our success in a number of sales cycles. Explaining the why behind the features is also key.
That's amazing. And I would ask you all, and I don't want to ask out of order here, so if you've got, is what should writers in general be cognizant of, right? Like where are instances where we may fall down, for example, or what should writers kind of keep in mind when they're writing, because the audience is broader than just the admins who are implementing the system?
I love this question, because the biggest thing to sort of think about in terms of documentation is that if it isn't documented functionally, it doesn't exist. And that goes for prospects. They need that documentation. That goes for people who are using it if they can't figure out how to use it. It goes for folks who are trying to use it and having troubles. For example, in support, there's literally a requirement to attach documentation to every single support case that is hopefully relevant. And if there's not relevant documentation, we need to be filing docs feedback to like improve that. And the thing though is that when we document something, a lot of times we're documenting like, okay, here's one example of a thing. And it's kind of general, and it's kind of if you know other things, you might be able to piece it together. But folks don't want to know the pieces. They want to be able to come in and say, I want to perform this task, or I want to build this construct, and I want to know that this product can do that. And Stephanie has this amazing metaphor regarding cakes and donuts that I'll let her get to. But I think that's the biggest thing, is if it's not in our docs, it doesn't exist. It's not real. in a way.
Right, but you're also saying you can't just document discrete things. You've got to understand the use case, what the user's trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, listing out the points that make a thing work is great, but understand how it's going to fit together and be able to present that in a handful of different ways, as far as like common use cases or things like that.
Right. So, I believe that documentation can transform readers, both existing customers and prospects, into users. And our argument is, in CX, we do a great job already on covering the concepts, the definitions, the steps, and the notes, but that we need to emphasize the why and the when. So not just the what, but the why and the when. And a part of that is having those use cases, showing those outcomes, and including examples. And then, like Joe said, having consistent language. And I would argue consistent language with sales and marketing. I think in CX, sometimes we have like this weird type of relationship with marketing where it's like they do their content over there and we do our like official content over here. But we need to be using the same language, the same terms. And my example that Joe's referring to is like, so imagine that you bought cake and you're eating your cake and oh no, you're having trouble eating it. So you get a help doc, but the help doc that was given to you is about how to eat a donut. And you're like, but it's the same ingredients. It's the same ingredients. It's flour, sugar, sodium bicarbonate, right? Like it's the same stuff, but the way that you eat it, the use case is completely different. So that's why I think it's important to have language consistent with sales and marketing, because when someone purchases one thing and they go to access help on how to use it, we need to be talking about the same thing. Even if internally we may think that it is the same thing, it's the exact same stuff. But the reason someone bought it, the how that they're using it could be completely different.
If you are responding to the marketing and say, well, I'm looking for this, and if you're not using the same terminology to describe it, or use maybe internal lingo or jargon or internal names, it can't be searched then either. So you can't even figure out how to eat the cake.
Right. Like in my area where we're doing machine learning models, it's heavily marketed as AI. If you go to Dreamforce, it's Einstein AI, we're going to do this for you, right? But internally, because we have teams of data scientists and they're building these unsupervised machine learning models, they know that AI is just like a fluff term, it's a buzz term, and they know the definition of what an machine learning model is, right? So they want me to use the correct terminology, because for a data scientist, it's not that buzz term. It's very specific, and they're proud of it, and they should be, right? That's where the technology, that's where the innovation is happening. It's not in just this broad, AI term. But I've had to push back a lot, because I know anytime I go to an event or I look at a Dreamforce video on our tools, it's described, the language being used is this is AI for a CRM. So I still, we still intentionally include that, even if it's to the dismay of product managers, because they're like, no, it's not AI, it's unsupervised machine learning models. And then they'll go into all the different algorithms we'll have, which is true, it's 100% accurate. But like I said, if you're eating cake and someone gives you the instructions on how to eat your cake by way of how to eat a donut, you're like, no, this creates a chasm that doesn't need to be there.
No, that's a great learning, I think, for writers, especially new writers, because what you're describing is, like you say, precision internally of the language and the things that they are justifiably absolutely proud of. But you're saying, as the pushback, tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, is that, well, it's my responsibility to be this bridge from the technology to the users and the prospects and the customers, right? So we would tell writers that the advice we would give is that if you're getting pushback like that, or if you're being told that it should be communicated this way, even though that may not be the correct way, you then need to go to your manager, go to your editor, go to me, go to somebody, go to a peer and ask, right? Especially if you're new and so did that put words in your mouth?
No, that's 100% correct. And one of my strongest relationships that I get value out of has been with the PMM, the product, marketing managers. Now, I may not always agree with some of the stuff that they write in their marketing materials, and I often try to correct it. But the point is I read it because it's important for me to know how people that are purchasing this tool, why they're buying it, what they were sold on, right? The pamphlet that you received when you walked in to get that appliance, like what was the taglines, so that when you open up the manual, those bullet points in the tagline are going to match up with what you see.
And would that be kind of a good a rule of thumb for writing, is that just make sure, consult the marketing materials just to see, not that it writes your documentation, but just to understand, like you just said, how is this being presented? What are the capabilities? Okay.
Yeah, because who else is a heavy consumer of those marketing materials? Sales.
Oh, of course.
In fact, they're the first ones to know, hey, the new lookbook, the new quick sheet is out for this. It's almost like it was built specifically for them, right? So when that's where they're getting their talking points. So it's really good to know.
That is also a really fantastic source if you are ever trying to expand your documentation with specific examples. If you're ever looking for ways to describe what something does, is that marketing material. If we are selling a product with a certain series of bullet points on the flyer and our docs don't emphasize and then tell people how to do the bullet points on the flyer, then it's a double problem, because marketing materials now, that's just marketing fluff, they're overselling it, even if it is totally capable of doing those things. And then it's a failure on the documentation part, because we're not meeting that need. We're telling people it can do a thing, and then we're just kind of being like, go figure it out, have fun, which is not helpful to anybody.
A disconnect, right? If you're a customer, because marketing is typically very expansive as well. It's not saying we have these 13 independent processes. It's saying we can help your customers succeed by at least understand that arc, so that maybe you can structure the content so the arc of achieving those use cases is possible, right, in your documentation.
And focusing on the outcome. Like in my example, when you have that craving for cake, right, and you go to the restaurant to order cake, you're not going to ask for the recipe book. You're going to look at a menu. That's the outcome. It's not the steps. And even if you are looking at a recipe book, what's the thing that usually is the driver on what you decide to make? Is it the steps? Is it the ingredients? No, it's probably the outcome. It's the picture. It's the description of the moist, fluffy, it's that description of what you're going to get, not how to do it. And that's another thing that Lyman and Joe and I all have a very clear understanding of, is the people that go to use this aren't the people that bought it. It's like two different groups of people. So it's almost like we have to resell it to them when they're in our docs, because they're just handed this and say, go do this, and they have a whole project and that, but they need to understand, what's the value I'm getting out of this? If we just tell someone, hey, do these 20 steps to, do X, like in my example was to bucket something, then it's like, okay, cool, that seems like a lot of work. But if we show them the outcome and you can see your data grouped into buckets, and then you're like, oh, that's why I would want to do that. And then it's like the mouth-watering picture. It's like, I want to do that. And then you're interested in the steps, right? You're not interested in the steps before you do it. So it's showing the outcome helps users understand the why and the when they would do something.
So the analogy then is, this is the beautiful picture in the recipe book.
Yes.
That it never, when I make something, it never quite looks that beautiful, but that's the picture that's your, and
Exactly.
so I understand what all
Yes.
of this pain and agony of.
Yes. And the thing, other writers have come to me and said, like, this sounds great stuff, but I'm nervous about putting the outcome pictures or examples in the doc, because I don't want a reader to think that that's the only way, right? Which is a fair argument. But again, we all understand, like when we look at those recipe photos, it's probably not going to look like that, right? We don't have like flowers or those like beautiful gold and diamond encrusted plates, but it's the art of the possible. It's what you could do if you follow these steps. Not saying that's going to be exactly this, but it gives you an idea on like what you're shooting for. So I think that's what's, also really important, is that it's not, by documenting an example, it is just that, it's an example. It's not the only way, and we in CX do a really great job of like showing screenshots of all the steps. So we're taking a picture, and making sure that the steps are accurate, and we're showing along the way for guidance. And then we complete it, but we usually, in a lot of docs, we end with a sentence of what the outcome is. And I'm like, that's one of my pet peeves. 'Cause I'm like, wait, clearly you went through all the work to do this, and why didn't you just take that one last photo of the end? Because like we're showing the example of like whatever example data we're working with, and to click this and do this, and so we're showing all these steps, and that's example data. And then at the end, it's like, and then show what happened. It's like just click save, and it's like, yeah, but then what do you see? We describe it with words, but we don't show it. At the end, we're very good at, like I said, showing what the steps look like, but not the outcome. And that's what we're trying to say, is like, show the outcome. That's where the value is.
Well, that's where people search for, right? They don't search for features or steps. They search for what they want to do, right? They search for those outcomes, right? And so it makes it important to frame it at the top, at the beginning, with the title and short description and a little context. And then, like you say, at the end, to show.
And for what it's worth, if you pay attention to our data structure, there's a reason the example blocks are at the end.
Like your use case example is fantastic, right? Because you don't want to let the fact that you can't cover every edge case be the reason that you don't do the 80%, right? Which is, I think, completely correct.
That's why the paying attention to the salesy marketing stuff is really important, because that gives us these sort of top level, like we've identified very common use cases. And coming at this, because I'm again a relatively new writer in the CX world, like a lot of my stuff was like, where do I just go break an org? Do I pop into a test environment and start messing around and maybe discover a use case? And the answer is no. There's resources out there. Go talk to your PMs, talk to your SEs, find your support team. Because let me tell you, support has some stories to tell you about your docs, probably. And there's so many things. Like we talk to PMs all the time. And in every single situation I've ever seen, they've been like, oh yeah, so-and-so giant customer asked about this thing, and so I wrote it up. And I'm like, cool, can I have what you wrote up? Can I take that and anonymize it a little bit, tweak it into a slightly more general use case? But that's a thing that someone obviously wanted to know about enough to chase it all the way to the PM. Like, can we fuel a doc out of that?
And do you generally get good responses when you reach out to the PMs and other SMEs?
I don't think I've ever had a PM be like, wait, you want to take this and make it scalable? Say no. Like, you want to take work that I've already done and reuse it so that I don't have to do this every single time a customer comes to me? Yeah, no, it's usually extremely positive, at least in my experience.
You don't need the decades of customer-facing experience that the three of us are bringing. Like, the relationships are already there. You just need to build upon them, because every writer is aligned to a PM and their team. So just leverage that relationship, then ask them, because chances are they already have existing standing meetings with SEs, with support, with their product marketing. So just like ask to get on the invite and then listen. You don't have to contribute, but you'll gain a lot by listening to all of it. And then anytime there's a world tour or a Salesforce event, and especially Dreamforce, there's a lot of work that goes into those, building demos and use cases and examples and decks. Like, just, that's like gold for us. We can, like Joe said, take that and anonymize it and put it into something that can impact everybody. So a lot of this content is already out there. We just have to, go find it.
Talk about a unique perspective. You all bring a unique perspective to this that I think will be really valuable.
I'm going to double down on the relationship building because I think we're just one relationship away from getting closer to the prospect or to the customer. And that because we have relationships with the PMs have relationships to the field SEs, right, as well. And so just as Stephanie mentioned, SEs would love to know who's writing what documentation or have access to that as well, because they get pinged by customers about, wait, I'm confused about this, right? So that feedback loop is pretty short if we're able to kind of bridge those relationships. And then there's definitely Slack channels. I don't think you put on your slide, but the hashtag help sell whatever the product that you cover. There's so many channels out there that as writers, we can just monitor once in a while, because once in a while you will get some feedback or questions around documentation. And that's a great way to stay aligned or in tune with what's happening out there from a selling process.
And it's not all critical feedback and questions. It's also a great place to like feel really good about yourself, because in those selling channels, people are asking questions and other people from the field are responding with a help doc. And it's like, yes, I wrote that and people are reading it. Because you know what feels the worst as a writer? When you write something that nobody reads. So it's really awesome to see all this activity around how helpful your document is.
So, and you could find these channels, and you'd be welcome to join. Sounds like you're always welcome to join. I'm sure they'd love to have you as a writer on the. That's fantastic.
I mean, we are kind of product experts, so
yeah.
When people ask questions about the product, we can not only probably provide relevant documentation, but we can also, given our experiences writing that documentation and exploring the stuff behind it, provide a lot of additional information. Like if people need more depth or more color or whatever, we are in a pretty cool position to do that. And yeah, it brings me like just an immense like wave of like glee every time someone's like, oh yeah, this thing that I found in Help. And I'm like, I wrote that. Yes.
I love that, because writing, even technical writing, is still personal. It's still part of you. That's wonderful. Well, look, you all, I took all the time I said I would take, but I can't thank you enough, because you have this perspective that's really amazing, and I think it'll be really valuable for the many hundreds of writers on the teams to hear it.
No, thank you for helping us spread the word. It's a lot more effective than going one by one and telling your writer, you are important. Everyone's reading your stuff. You're helping sell it. We should get a cut of sales.
A cut of sales. We'll add that to your V2 mom. See how that.
But I stand by nothing at Salesforce or any company would have a buyer if it wasn't documented. No, I haven't met anyone that wants to A/B test that with me, but we could try. If one day we want to put out a product without documentation, we can see how well that will sell. I bet it'll be dismal. But we are
Did you hear
really
about this new super cool thing? We didn't write it down anywhere.
You all are great. Thank you so much. It's been a fun discussion. I knew you guys were fun to talk to when I saw you in the meeting. So that was a fun talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you for helping us scale this out, actually. This is a great way to be able to broadcast it. So thank you for thinking of us.
Oh, no. This is very, very important. And you live in it, and you all have come from this deep wealth of experience.
Thank you.
Thank you to your team, Stan, actually, of editors that help us make our content so much better. So they're awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody
oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I love every editor response I get. Like, but aren't they taking apart what you wrote? And I'm like, oh yeah, they should. Please do so.
It happens. It happens to all of us, including me. No, thank you for saying that. All right. You'll have a wonderful weekend.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Would you like to have Stephanie, Lyman, and Joe give their full presentation to your team? Slack them or reach out on LinkedIn. The names are on the screen and in the program notes.